The air in the green room crackled, not with static, but with tension. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, felt it prickle her skin. Tonight wasn't just another briefing. It was a gladiatorial contest, a televised showdown with Derek Vance, the talk show host who made a career out of eviscerating reputations. His show was where political careers went to die, a modern-day Roman Colosseum, and Karoline had just volunteered as tribute. Her phone buzzed, an email flashing on the screen. Invitation to the Derek Vance Show. The name itself was a byword for ruthless interrogation. Seasoned politicians trembled at the thought. Leavitt frowned, her fingers still skimming through briefing notes for the next day's press conference. Her eyes darted to the bottom of the story, which read, "Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories." She paused, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. She should decline. Sarah Smith, her ever-vigilant assistant, whispered urgently, eyes glued to her iPad. "He'll twist everything she says. Last week he made a senator cry." Leavitt allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. She knew Vance's playbook, the ambush questions, the sarcastic barbs, the theatrical outrage. He wasn't interested in truth. He was a showman, a ringmaster of chaos. At 27, a mother to an 8-month-old son, and the voice of the Trump administration, Leavitt was no stranger to pressure. But this was a different beast. This was facing a predator in its natural habitat, live on national television. The PR team had warned her, practically begged her to steer clear. But a glint of steel hardened Leavitt's gaze. If he wants to play, she thought, a thrill of anticipation mixed with the apprehension. "I'll play." She turned to Sarah, her voice firm and resolute. "I want to do it. Tell them I'm in." Sarah's jaw dropped, but Leavitt was already back to her notes, a faint, almost predatory smile playing on her lips. A week later, Karoline Leavitt stepped out of a sleek black SUV, the vehicle a stark contrast to the vibrant energy of downtown Washington, D.C. A cold breeze whipped through her blonde hair, but her gaze remained sharp, unwavering, like a hawk surveying its hunting grounds. The studio loomed before her, a modern glass and steel structure humming with barely contained excitement. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the electric anticipation of a major sporting event. The circular stage, ablaze with LED lights, resembled a futuristic arena. Rows of seats were packed with a sea of faces, curious, eager, skeptical, all waiting for the spectacle to begin. The Derek Vance Show wasn't just a program. It was a cultural phenomenon, a place where reputations were forged or shattered. Leavitt knew that all too well. Sarah Smith trailed behind, clutching her iPad like a shield, her anxiety practically radiating off her. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice a shaky whisper. He once made a CEO walk off mid-interview. Leavitt didn't answer immediately. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the polished marble floor as she strode towards the green room, the sound a steady counterpoint to the nervous flutter in her own chest. The small, almost suffocatingly quiet room offered a brief respite from the impending storm. A large screen mounted on the wall played a montage of Derek Vance's greatest hits, a senator blushing furiously under a barrage of personal questions, a CEO stammering as Vance mocked his company's failing stock price, a Hollywood actor sitting stone-faced as Vance's laughter boomed through the studio. Leavitt's lips twitched. She saw the pattern, the carefully crafted strategy. Vance was a hunter, trapping his prey with pointed questions, then savoring their slow, public unraveling. He's not after truth, she realized, a whisper escaping her lips. He wants drama. Sarah Smith interrupted her thoughts, setting a water bottle on the table with a slightly trembling hand. "They say you're on in 10 minutes. I still think this is a bad idea." Leavitt picked up the bottle, twisting it lightly in her hands, her eyes still fixed on the screen, analyzing Vance's tactics. "He wants to play this game, Sarah," she said, her voice calm but laced with a steely determination. "Then I'll play, but on my terms. Sarah sighed, a mixture of resignation and admiration in her eyes, and stepped back as Leavitt stood, smoothing her impeccably fitted black blazer. She wasn't a CEO or an actor. She was the White House press secretary, a survivor of brutal press briefings and grueling campaign days, fueled by adrenaline and 4 hours of sleep. Vance might be a nightmare to others, but to her, he was just another hurdle, another challenge to be overcome. The green room door swung open, a crew member with a headset appearing like a fleeting apparition. "5 minutes, Miss Leavitt," he said quickly, before vanishing as swiftly as he'd appeared. Leavitt took a deep breath, straightening her sleeves, a ritualistic preparation for battle. She hadn't flinched when facing a hostile press corps, nor when Trump had narrowly escaped assassination in Pennsylvania, and she certainly wouldn't flinch now. The door to the stage opened, and Karoline Leavitt stepped out into a maelstrom of applause and hushed murmurs. Blinding LED lights hit her, highlighting her petite frame in the sharp black suit. Across from her, Derek Vance rose from his imposing desk at the stage's center, a wide, almost predatory grin spreading across his face. He looked like a Roman emperor, ready to preside over the games. "Karoline Leavitt," he boomed, his voice amplified, arms raised in a theatrical gesture. She nodded slightly, shaking his hand with a brief, firm grip, a handshake devoid of any warmth. She then settled into the chair opposite him, the audience quieting as the show's theme music faded, the lights focusing on the two figures, locked in a silent battle of wills. Vance leaned forward, chin resting on his hand, eyes gleaming with a mischievous glint. "Welcome to my show, Karoline," he began, his voice smooth, yet sharp as a newly honed blade. "Youngest press secretary in history, 27 years old, the voice of Donald Trump, or more like his loudspeaker, right?" Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd, punctuated by a few whistles. Leavitt offered a faint, almost dismissive smile, her body language unyielding, her eyes locked onto Vance's, a silent challenge. "You can call me whatever you want, Derek," she replied evenly, "but I'm here to tell the truth, not to please you." A few audience members clapped, a hesitant show of support. But Vance didn't flinch. He tapped his fingers lightly on the desk, his grin widening, a predator sensing weakness. "The truth, huh? Well, let's get to it then," he said, his tone sharpening. "You and Trump just banned Reuters and AP from the first cabinet meeting. What's going on? Is the White House scared of the press?" Leavitt tilted her head slightly, unfazed by the direct attack. "Not scared, Derek," she answered, her voice clear and steady. "Selective. We invite people who actually report, not ones who twist everything against the president." Newsmax and Bloomberg were still there. The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disapproval. Vance smirked, clearly unsatisfied. "Selective," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sounds more like control, don't you think? That's dangerous, a government deciding who gets to speak." She shrugged lightly, her gaze unwavering. "Dangerous is when the media thinks it can shape the truth, Derek. We just changed the guest list in a cramped room. You act like it's the end of the world." A small burst of laughter erupted from the crowd, a sign that she'd landed a point. But Vance didn't join in. He tapped the desk harder, pivoting to a new line of attack. "Fine, let me ask this," he said, his voice rising in volume. "You're blindly loyal to Trump, people say that. Do you ever think for yourself, or just parrot what he tells you?" The studio air grew heavy, the audience holding its collective breath, waiting for her response. Leavitt sat up straighter, her hands clasped on the table, a picture of composure. "I'm loyal to what I believe," she said firmly. "President Trump fights for the American people. I'm proud to stand with him. You want to call that blind, go ahead, but I'm not here to be anyone's puppet." A few claps erupted, louder and more sustained than before. But Vance just smirked, flipping a card on his desk, as if he had meticulously prepared his next strike. 27 years old, he said, drawing out each word, savoring the moment. 27. In White House press secretary facing the world. Don't you think you're a little green, Caroline? I mean, you were in college a few years ago, still learning to change your son's diapers. The audience laughed louder, some whistling, fueled by Vance's blatant attempt to belittle her. He leaned back, smug, waiting for her to falter, to show a crack in her armor. But Leavitt didn't blink. She smiled, a cold, razor-sharp smile that sent a shiver down the spines of some in the audience. "Age doesn't matter, Derek," she replied, her voice calm but potent, like a coiled spring. "Results do. I helped Trump win a second term, run the briefing room daily, and still get home to hold my son every night. You think that's green? I call it getting it done." Applause rang out again, louder, longer, more enthusiastic. A few people stood, shouting, "That's right!" Vance raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by her swift and decisive comeback. He tapped the desk, forcing a smile, but his eyes flickered with a hint of uncertainty. "Getting it done, huh?" he said, his tone tightening. "Then let me ask this straight. You're loyal to Trump, but he's not always right, like these new tariffs. People say they'll kill American farmers. How do you explain that?" Leavitt took a light breath, not out of nerves, but to gather momentum, to prepare her counteroffensive. "Tariffs protect American jobs, Derek," she said, her voice solid and unwavering. "We're not letting China or anyone else walk all over us. Farmers might struggle short-term, but they'll be stronger long-term. Exports are up. Want me to send you the numbers?" Another laugh from the crowd, this time aimed directly at Vance. He smirked, but didn't respond right away, the carefully constructed facade of control beginning to crack. Vance flipped to a new card on his desk, his fingers tapping against it like a countdown clock. "You had a baby in the middle of last year's campaign," he began, his voice slow and deliberate, a clear shift in tactics. "July 2024, right? Then back to work right away, I hear. Just weeks later, you were in Butler, Pennsylvania when Trump dodged that assassination attempt. What does your husband think of that? Or does family mean nothing when Trump calls?" A murmur spread through the audience, a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Some raised eyebrows, others snickered, sensing the deeply personal nature of the attack. Leavitt didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened slightly on the table, a subtle, almost imperceptible sign of controlled anger. "Family's everything to me, Derek," she replied, her voice even, but cutting like a shard of ice. "I work so my son has a country worth living in. My husband supports me. He knew who I was when he married me. What about you, Derek? Ever sacrificed anything besides your ego?" A wave of applause erupted, stronger than before, fueled by the raw emotion of her response. A few, "That's right!" shouts echoed from the back of the studio. Vance smirked, clearly stung by the counterpunch, but he tried to maintain his composure. "Nice," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "But don't act like a superhero, Caroline. You're a mom, a press secretary, Trump's mouthpiece. Don't you get tired? Or is that just an act for pity?" Scattered laughs from the crowd, but weaker this time, as if they were sensing the shift in momentum, waiting to see her next move. She smiled, a cold, confident smile that sent a chill down Vance's spine. "Tired? Sure, Derek," she said bluntly. "But I'm not here to whine. I do this because I believe in it. Have you ever believed in anything besides your ratings?" Applause roared again, longer, more sustained, with some whistles and shouts of approval. Vance slammed his hand on the desk, the sharp sound cutting through the noise. "Ratings?" he snapped. "You want to get personal? Let's talk about this." He leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with a predatory glee. "Last week you met Vivian Slay, that 9-year-old with brain cancer, right? Posted a picture on X, all touching stuff. But people say it's just cheap White House PR. What do you say to that?" The audience went dead silent. Not a sound. This wasn't a game anymore. This was a low blow, a deliberate attempt to exploit a child suffering for political gain. Leavitt took a deep breath, her eyes darkening briefly, but her voice held steady, a testament to her unwavering control. "Vivian's a fighter," she said, her words slow and weighty, each syllable carrying the weight of her conviction. I met her because she's beaten the doctor's odds for over 2 years with a disease they said would take her in 6 months. I don't need PR from a kid, Derek. I learned strength from her, something you clearly don't get." A few audience members stood, clapping, their eyes misty. The applause spread, powerful and resonant, a wave of support washing over Leavitt. But Vance didn't back down. "Touching," he said, his voice cooling, but still laced with cynicism. "But don't play noble. Let's talk Trump. He just announced a Pentagon overhaul, firing tons of generals. People call it a purge, say he wants the military as his personal guard. How do you justify that?" He leaned back, smug, waiting for her to trip, to stumble over this politically charged minefield. Leavitt sat taller, her hands clasped, a picture of unwavering resolve. "Overhaul's not a purge, Derek," she replied, her voice like steel. "We're cutting out people who don't serve America's interest, bureaucrats who've sat there too long. The military is stronger with real leaders, not figureheads. Want stats? Defense spending's more efficient than ever." Some applause broke out, but Vance cut in, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to regain control. "Efficient?" he scoffed. "You call kicking thousands to the curb efficient? You know, Caroline, people say you and Trump are turning the White House into a circus, and you're the ringmaster." Laughter rose again, louder, but Leavitt didn't waver. She met his gaze, her eyes locked onto his. A silent battle of wills. "A circus?" she shot back, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "I call it work. What about you, Derek? What do you run every night at this desk? Comedy or tragedy?" The laughter flipped, now aimed squarely at Vance. He smirked, gripping his card tighter, clearly starting to fray, the carefully constructed facade of control crumbling before the audience's eyes. "You're good at dodging," he growled, his voice losing its smooth, polished edge. "But I'm not done. What about the tariffs? Farmers are screaming over prices. You telling them to wait it out while they lose their homes?" The audience murmured, the tension thicker than ever, the weight of the issue pressing down on the studio. Leavitt tilted her head, her eyes locked on his, a predator, sensing its prey weakening. "American farmers are this country's backbone," she said firmly. "Tariffs shield them from cheap foreign goods. Short-term pain. But exports are up 15% from last year. You want them hooked on China forever? I don't." Applause surged again, strong and sustained. But Vance slammed the desk, cutting it off with a desperate, almost frantic gesture. 15%, he shouted. "You think numbers comfort anyone when they're starving? You live in Trump world, Caroline, out of touch. People say you're just his pretty puppet, and I'm starting to believe it." The audience went quiet, waiting. This was Vance's hardest hit. Not just an attack on her policies, but a strike at her very honor, her integrity. Leavitt smiled, the coldest smile of the night, a smile that promised retribution. "Pretty puppet," she echoed, her voice low and dangerous like the rumble of an approaching storm. "I helped Trump win, run the briefing room daily, and face guys like you with no script. If that's a puppet, what are you, Derek, a clown reading cards for cash?" The applause exploded, a deafening roar that shook the studio. People stood, shouting, whistling, a wave of unrestrained support washing over Leavitt. Vance opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, he faltered, his carefully crafted composure shattered. The studio air burned hot, the LED lights glaring down on Derek Vance. But now, he was the one feeling the heat. Karoline Leavitt sat across from him, her cool blue eyes fixed on him, the faint smile on her lips, now sharper than ever. Vance had just thrown his heaviest punch, calling her Trump's pretty puppet, and the audience was waiting to see how she'd hit back. The echo of her last comeback still hung in the air, a palpable tension filling the studio. Vance tried to regain control, gripping his card, his voice shaky but defiant. "You think you're clever, Caroline," he snarled, "but I'll make you answer for real. No more fancy words." Leavitt tilted her head slightly, unshaken, a quiet strength radiating from her. "I'm waiting, Derek," she said, her voice calm but brimming with a quiet power. "But if you want the truth, why not start with yourself?" The audience fell silent, the air thick with anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. Vance raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain his signature smirk, but a flicker of panic crossed his eyes. He sensed a trap, a carefully laid snare. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice dropping, a subtle tremor betraying his unease. She sat up straighter, hands clasped on the table, her gaze unwavering, locked onto his. "You sit here criticizing me, criticizing Trump, criticizing the administration," she began, her voice slow and deliberate, each word a carefully placed stone in her counterattack. "But who's paying you, Derek? The big donors of this network? The ones who've hated Trump from day one? Do they tell you what to ask? Or are you just their puppet?" A loud "ooh" rose from the crowd, a collective gasp of surprise and recognition. A few stood, clapping in spontaneous bursts. Vance opened his mouth, but Leavitt didn't give him a chance to interrupt. "You love asking tough questions," she continued, her voice rising, full of righteous authority. "So, have you ever asked your network why they twist the truth about us? Why they push fake stories about tariffs, about the Pentagon, about everything we do? Or are you too busy playing for ratings?" Applause erupted, stronger, longer, more sustained. A corner of the room shouted, "Let him have it!" Vance tapped the desk, trying to cut in, to regain control, but this time he couldn't stem the tide. The audience was with Leavitt. "You're deflecting!" he yelled, his voice trembling, the polished veneer of control completely shattered. "We're talking about you, not me." But Leavitt smiled, the coldest, most triumphant smile of the night. "No, Derek," she replied, her tone calm, but laced with a steely edge. "We're talking about the truth. I fight for it every day, in the briefing room, on the campaign, in every decision. And you? What are you besides a clown reading cards for cash from people who want to take us down?" The applause exploded, a volcanic eruption of sound. Rows of the audience were standing, cheering, whistling, the studio filled with a palpable sense of victory. Vance recoiled, his hand gripping the card so tightly it bent. You can't turn this around like that," he stammered, his composure utterly gone, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. But Leavitt gave him no room to breathe, no chance to recover. "I can and I will," she said, leaning forward, her eyes piercing through him. "You call me a puppet? Then what are you when your donors decide who gets airtime, who gets smeared? I'm loyal to Trump because I believe in him. Who are you loyal to, Derek? Your wallet?" The audience erupted again, the applause thundering, some raising phones to capture the moment, the epic takedown of Derek Vance. Vance opened his mouth, but no words came. He glanced to stage left, where producer James Carter stood frozen, hands on his head, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Leavitt sat still, her eyes never leaving Vance's, letting him drown in the stifling silence, the weight of the audience's judgment pressing down on him. Vance started to speak, but his voice cracked, feeble and defeated. You're trying to make me the bad guy." "No," Leavitt cut in, her voice hard as steel. "You did that yourself. I'm here for the American people, the ones you and your network ignore every day. You make a living dividing them, twisting the truth. I don't. I build trust. You tear it down." Applause roared again, so strong it shook the stage floor. Vance slammed the desk, a desperate, futile attempt to claw back control. "You think you're a hero," he shouted, his voice breaking. "You're just a 27-year-old kid playing politics." Leavitt smiled, this time a victorious smile, the smile of someone who had not only survived the arena but conquered it. 27, she repeated, her voice deliberate, each word a hammer blow. "Young enough to know what people want, strong enough to take on guys like you. And you, Derek? How old are you and still don't know who you're serving?" The audience stood fully, the applause and cheers deafening, drowning out the studio. Vance sat stunned, his hands trembling, staring at his card as if it could somehow save him. You can't do this," he muttered, but his voice was lost in the roar of the crowd. Leavitt leaned back, her gaze still locked on him, a picture of unwavering composure. "I just did," she said, her voice low but commanding. "And I'm not done yet." A few audience members shouted, "Keep going, Karoline!" Vance glanced at James Carter again, but the producer just shook his head, helpless. He'd lost control completely. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself, his voice faltering in the face of the audience's overwhelming support for Leavitt. All right," he said, raising a hand as if to quiet them. But no one cared. He flipped his last card, clearly a desperate, last-ditch effort to salvage the show. "What's your next move for the White House? Give us some light amid all this." His smile was forced, his eyes darting stage left, searching for a lifeline. Leavitt tilted her head, a hint of disdain in her eyes, but she answered. "My plan, our plan, is to build trust, Derek," she said, her voice firm, each word like a hammer on a nail. "Trust that you and people like you have shredded for years. The American people deserve the truth, not a circus on TV." The applause erupted again, so loud it overpowered the speakers. Some raised phones recording every word she said. Vance opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He tapped the desk, trying to maintain a calm face, but his eyes betrayed his defeat. "Trust, huh?" he mumbled, his voice weak, a hollow echo of his former confidence. "You talk a good game." But no one cared about him anymore. The audience was watching Leavitt, and she knew it. She stood, nodding slightly to Vance, a cold, unfriendly nod, a dismissal. Then she walked off stage amid deafening applause. "Karoline, Karoline!" a few shouted, and she gave a small smile, not looking back, as she disappeared backstage. Vance sat frozen, his hand crushing the card until it snapped in two. He yanked off his earpiece, slamming it on the desk, turning to the audience with a strange, almost manic smile. "Thanks for watching, everyone," he yelled, but his voice cracked, lifeless. "We had a memorable night, right?" No one clapped. Some murmured, others shook their heads, and then the audience began filing out, their chatter buzzing loudly, a stark contrast to the stunned silence Vance had tried to create. Backstage, Vance stormed off the set, his face flushed, pointing at James Carter, his producer. "What the hell just happened, James?" he shouted, his voice breaking with rage. James, still cradling his head, stepped back. "I don't know, Derek," he stammered. She turned it all around. We didn't expect her to be that strong." Vance slammed his hand against the wall, breathing hard. "Didn't expect? She just made me a laughingstock in front of millions." Outside the studio, the audience was still buzzing as they left. A middle-aged man turned to his friend, shaking his head. "I came to see her crash," he said, "but she just made Vance look like a fool." A young woman held up her phone, laughing. "This clip's going to go viral. She's unreal." In the crowd, Emily Garcia, a freelance journalist, typed furiously on her phone. Karoline Leavitt didn't just survive Derek Vance. She demolished his playground. As Karoline Leavitt left the studio in the black SUV, the real storm was just beginning. Not on Derek Vance's stage, but across social media and the news. Minutes after she walked off, X was flooded with clips and comments from the interview. Her phone buzzed non-stop in her hand, the screen lighting up with hundreds of notifications. She scrolled through, her cool blue eyes now tinged with satisfaction. A post from an account with tens of thousands of followers read, "Karoline Leavitt just knocked out Derek Vance. This wasn't an interview, it was a battle." The post already had over 50,000 likes, and the number was climbing fast. Sarah Smith, sitting beside her in the car, clutched her iPad, eyes wide. "Have you seen this?" Sarah said, her voice excited. "They're calling you Jay-Z's political queen. Someone wrote, 'She flipped the board. Vance didn't know who he was up against.'" Leavitt gave a small laugh, nodding slightly. "They're telling the truth," she replied, her voice calm. "He brought it on himself." But not everyone was a fan. Another post from the opposition popped up. Caroline's just Trump's megaphone. She dodged every real question. Still, even the criticism couldn't dim the growing wave of admiration. Back at the studio, Derek Vance sat in the backstage room, crushing a water bottle until it crumpled. James Carter, his producer, paced, his phone buzzing nonstop. "Derek, you need to see this," James said, his voice tense, holding out the screen. A Newsmax headline flashed. Karoline Leavitt turns Derek Vance into a live TV joke. Vance snatched the phone from James, his face red. "A joke?" he growled. "She can't do this to me." But James shook his head. "They're not talking about your questions anymore, Derek. They're talking about how she flipped you." Vance slammed the bottle on the table, storming to the network meeting room. Inside, executives were gathered, the air heavy like a courtroom. A woman in a navy suit set her phone down, eyeing Vance coldly. "Our engagement's the highest this year," she said evenly, "but not the way we wanted." Vance smirked, forcing a grin. "See, I brought ratings." But another exec cut in, his voice sharp. "Ratings don't matter when the audience hates you, Derek. They're calling you fake on X." James stepped in, holding his iPad, his voice shaky. "We need to spin this," he said. "Say Leavitt dodged accountability, that she didn't answer for real. We can turn it around." Vance nodded, eyes glinting with a flicker of hope. "Yeah, she's just good at deflecting. I'll go on air, tell the audience straight." But the woman in the navy suit shook her head. "Too late," she said. "The clips are everywhere. People don't trust you anymore. They trust her." Vance sank into a chair, his hands covering his face, silent for the first time all night. Out there, the media storm didn't stop. Emily Garcia, the freelance journalist in the audience, posted an analysis on her blog. Karoline Leavitt didn't just survive Derek Vance. She demolished his playground. This was the moment the media got exposed. The piece was shared thousands of times, spreading to major outlets. Newsmax ran a headline, "Leavitt teaches Vance a lesson in truth." Even Reuters, despite being barred by Leavitt from cabinet meetings, had to admit she'd turned an interview into a political victory. In the car, Leavitt kept scrolling X, reading comments from regular people, not journalists or politicians. One wrote, "She spoke for us. Vance just sat there clowning." Another, "Caroline's the new star. She's fearless." Her phone buzzed again, a text from Trump. "Great job, Karoline. You made me proud." She replied, "Thank you, Mr. President. This is for the people." Sarah Smith looked at her, eyes gleaming. "Do you see this? They love you." Leavitt nodded. "They don't love me, Sarah. They love the truth." The storm didn't stay on X. YouTube channels started posting clips, titles screaming, "Karoline Leavitt destroys Derek Vance. Must watch." One video hit 100,000 views in under an hour. Comments flooded in. "She's unreal," and "Vance is done." But there were dissenting voices too. "She's just defending Trump, nothing new." Still, the debate wasn't about Vance anymore. It was about Leavitt and the bigger question: can the media be trusted? Karoline Leavitt walked into her small Washington, D.C. apartment as the clock neared midnight. A dim glow from the living room spilled out, and she saw her husband, a tall figure, cradling their 8-month-old son, asleep on his shoulder. He turned, smiling gently. "You're back," he whispered, laying the baby in the crib by the sofa. Leavitt shed her coat, slipping off her heels quietly, so as not to wake the boy. She sat, pulling him close, feeling his steady breaths in her arms. "Thanks for watching him," she said, her voice softening, a stark contrast to the sharpness she'd displayed on stage just hours earlier. Her husband sat beside her, showing her his phone. "Have you seen this?" He pointed to a trending X post. The scariest thing tonight wasn't what Karoline Leavitt said, but realizing how much Derek Vance and the media want to control the narrative. It had over 200,000 likes. Leavitt stared at the words, her eyes briefly pensive. "They're right," she said, her voice lowering. "Not about me, but about what they saw." She laid her son in the crib, standing to look out the window. The faint streetlights illuminated her face, and she began to reflect. The interview wasn't just a personal win. It was the moment the audience saw through Derek Vance's facade, through the media's carefully constructed narrative, and asked, How long have we been manipulated? She'd known it since entering politics. The people no longer trusted the press or guys like Vance, and she'd given them a reason to believe in something else, the truth. Her husband stood behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You did great," he said. "But do you think they'll change?" Leavitt gave a small laugh, shaking her head. "No way," she replied. "They'll try to smear me, smear Trump." But this time, the audience saw. And once they see, they don't forget. She turned, her gaze resolute. "I don't need them to like me. I just need them to listen." She grabbed her phone, posting a short X update. "Thanks for listening tonight, everyone. The truth always wins." It instantly racked up thousands of interactions, but she powered off the device, setting it on the table. This wasn't the time to bask in victory. It was time to gear up for the next battles. The story. Karoline Leavitt confronts a rude talk show host. Her response leaves the audience speechless. Sharply reflects today's U.S. society, where media, politics, and social media intertwine, creating a tense battlefield of public opinion. Karoline Leavitt, a 27-year-old White House press secretary, facing off against Derek Vance, a rude host representing traditional media, wasn't just an interview. It was a symbol of polarization and distrust in power institutions. Life in America today is the same. People doubt the press, politicians are scrutinized at every turn, and social media shapes truth faster than any mainstream channel. When Vance attacked Leavitt with personal jabs, like her giving birth mid-campaign or Trump's policies, tariffs, Pentagon overhaul, only to be flipped by her exposing his hypocrisy, it showed that Americans now don't just want answers. They want authenticity. The takeaway from this story is, in a world full of misinformation, how you face pressure and defend your values matters more than what others say about you. Leavitt didn't just counter Vance with facts, exports up 15%, but with personal resolve. "I work for my son," something anyone in America, from office workers to parents, can apply. Don't let the Derek Vances in life, like mocking co-workers or social media critics, shake your conviction. Stand firm, wield the truth as your weapon, and let your actions prove your worth, like Leavitt did, turning Vance's stage into her triumph. In today's America, where people get swept into pointless arguments, this lesson reminds us to focus on what matters and fearlessly confront to defend the truth. Thanks for following Karoline Leavitt's journey, flipping the script on Derek Vance. Karoline Leavitt's victory wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about demonstrating the power of authenticity and conviction. She didn't rely on cheap shots or personal attacks. She stood firm in her beliefs and presented her case with clarity and strength. She didn't allow herself to be bullied or intimidated by a seasoned media personality. She held her ground and exposed his hypocrisy. In a world where spin and manipulation are rampant, we all need to be more like Karoline Leavitt. We need to be critical thinkers, truth seekers, and defenders of our values. We need to be willing to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's unpopular or uncomfortable. The future of our democracy depends on it. This isn't just about politics. It's about life. It's about how we interact with each other, how we make decisions, and how we shape the world around us. By embracing critical thinking and standing firm in our values, we can create a more informed, engaged, and truthful society. What are your thoughts? How do you navigate the challenges of finding truth in today's media landscape? Share your strategies and tips in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more insights on navigating the complexities of our world.